Welcome back to PSC Tech Byte. Today I'm wearing the Scott Goo style. Hope you like it. And we are going to talk about how to make a SharePoint Framework based Teams tab configurable using the capabilities provided by SPFx. In fact, you can easily make it possible for your end users to configure a custom theme tab simply implementing a property pane. And in the property pane, you can use out-of-the-box property pane controls provided by SharePoint Framework. You can use your own custom property controls, or why not, you can leverage the already existing open source PnP property controls, which you can find at the GitHub URL that you see on this slide. So let me move to the demo environment and show you in practice how to create a property pane for an SPFx Teams tab. So here I am in Microsoft Teams in the web-based UI, and this is a Teams tab which I created using SharePoint Framework. We can easily configure such kind of Teams tab using the settings options in the menu, and here we can access a panel which is actually the property pane of the SharePoint Framework web part that we created. As you can see here, the interface can be quite rich because, for example, here I'm using the PnP Property Pane controls, so I can use the people picker control that we have in PnP, and the web part and the tab will follow my settings. I can use the calendar control. I can play with the taxonomy, so I can search for terms in the taxonomy, and I can select or deselect items from here, and I will get the corresponding result in the UI of my web part. So how can we build such a high-level user interface to configure the Teams tab in Microsoft Teams using SPFx? Well, let me switch to the solution in Visual Studio Code. And here we have the web part I was just showing you. As you saw last week, to create a SharePoint Framework Teams tab, you simply need to create a web part and configure that web part as available in Teams. So in the manifest, you configure the Teams tab as the supported hosts. And in the web part, you configure a set of properties. In my scenario, in my sample, I have an array of people, which is for the people picker control, a date time field, and a set of terms, which I will use to collect the terms selected from the taxonomy. And in the code base of my web part, I simply implemented the get property pane configuration method, which is an out-of-the-box method that we have in SharePoint Framework, regardless we are developing a web part for Teams tabs or just for SharePoint Online. And in the get property pane configuration, we need to return as the return value an object implementing the iProperty pane configuration interface. In there, we will have to provide a collection of groups of properties in the property pane. And here, for example, I'm using the property pane controls provided as open source controls by PnP, which you can find on the web at this URL, pnp.github.io/spdevfx property controls. You can see here the documentation, how to install those controls, and at the very end, you will be able to use those controls in your property pane rendering. For example, here I use the property field people picker. I connect it to the people property of my web part, and I set up all of the settings of my people picker control. I do the same with the date time picker control, which will be associated with the date time property, and for the field term picker control, which is indeed associated with the terms property of my web part. It is interesting to notice that when you use such kind of controls, the underlying set collection that these controls are based on is the one which sits under the cover of the theme in which you are. So, for example, if I go back to my theme right here and I go to the files of my general channel, if I open in SharePoint this library, this is the set collection that is by default the supporting set collection for those controls. And there are set collections that you can eventually configure as the target if you want to switch from the default one of the theme in which you are to another one. So, quite simple and quite easy. You simply configure the property pane with the property pane controls, whether you want to use the out-of-the-box ones, custom ones that you create by yourself, or the PnP property pane controls, and those controls will render in the UI of Teams as they do in the UI of SharePoint Online. You configure the properties, and you can access their values simply when you configure the React component, for example, that will render the UI of your solution. And that's it, simple as that. As usual, thank you for watching. I hope you liked it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you next week for another video. Thank you.